Hello and welcome back to Jekyll and Hyde Annotates with me. We are now on chapter 5, Incidents of the Letter. You might want to pause the video here so that you can go and grab your copy of the text, a highlighter and a pen so that you can annotate as I go along. This chapter is quite a small, short chapter, but there's, as always, quite a lot to cover, so I'll get straight into it. It was late in the afternoon when Mr. Utterson found his way to Dr. Jekyll's door, where he was at once admitted by Poole and carried down by the kitchen offices and across a yard which had once been a garden to the building which was indifferently known as the laboratory or the dissecting rooms. So Utterson has arrived at Jekyll's house and he's being taken to the lab area. The doctor had bought the house from the heirs of a celebrated surgeon, and his own tastes being rather chemical than anatomical, had changed the destination of the block at the bottom of the garden. It was the first time that the lawyer had been received in that part of his friend's quarters, and he eyed the dingy, windowless structure with curiosity, and gazed round with a distasteful sense of strangeness as he crossed the theatre, once crowded with eager students, and now lying gaunt and silent. The tables laden with chemical apparatus, the floor strewn with crates and littered with packing straw, and the light falling dimly through the foggy cupola. So we've got the Utterson's arrival at Jekyll's lab where he's never been before, and the structure of the house is described as a windowless structure. So this is really important, and you might want to note it down on a notepad as a key quotation. But this is a symbolic description hinting at secrecy and hidden truths, which we've already discussed how important the symbolisms of secrecy are, and the theme of secrecy in general is. We've also got the site of the operating theatre, which conjures the image of a once busy professional site, but the desolate building now, with fog obscuring it, makes the space seem wild and hints more at the supernatural than the scientific. So it's lost almost its scientific element. So the reason it was so popular was because of its scientific element, but it's actually lost this and has been replaced with a supernatural atmosphere. The laboratory is the main setting of the mysterious events in the story, but far from being a place of science and medicine, the lab is deserted and strange, more gothic than a place of science. In this setting, the novel seems to hint at the insufficiency or even the obsolescence of science, so almost like science isn't enough. Science doesn't seem to quench Jekyll's thirst. So Jekyll, once a man of science, is leaving all that behind, leaving it unused as he seeks new, unknown knowledge and truth. Let's continue to read. At the further end, a flight of stairs mounted to a door covered with red baize. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned that a cupola is a domed roof, sometimes containing windows. At the further end, a flight of stairs mounted to a door covered with red baize, and through this Mr. Utterson was at last received into the doctor's cabinet. It was a large room. So a doctor's cabinet is a private study. It was a large room fitted round with glass presses, furnished, among other things, with a cheval glass and a business table, and looking out upon the court by 3 dusty windows barred with iron. So again, the theme of secrecy is seen here because it's barred with iron, so something is being hidden, something is being locked up. Remember, there's all of these motifs of things being locked up, the door, the cabinet that Utterson keeps Jekyll's will in. There's constantly these moments of secrecy that we see in the objects that are used. Glass presses as well. So where's the glass? Glass presses are glass-fronted cupboards. Cheval glass is a mirror set in a frame which can be tilted. A fire burned in the grate, a lamp was set lighted on the chimney shelf, for even in the houses the fog began to lie thickly. So we've got the fog again here, but instead of it being outside, it's actually inside now. we've almost got the personification as well of the fog, which is something that is recurrent throughout this scene, the personification of fog. So the fog has entered the building, again creating mystery and tension, but also unambiguity. So remember, the fog is like a character in itself, and we've already discussed this in an earlier video, so if you'd like to go back and watch them if you haven't already, then you'll know what we've discussed about the fog and what it's symbolic of, and how important it is as in the novel. But we've discussed before how it's almost like a character in itself. It follows the entire novel, having an ominous presence wherever it goes. And there, close up to the warmth, sat Dr. Jekyll, looking deadly sick. Throughout this passage here, we see the semantic field of illness or disease used to describe Jekyll. Now this is a marked contrast, so anything that I've highlighted in yellow is quotations that you can use, that you can join together to show that you are using judicious quotes, which mean well judged quotes, and this is a really highly awarded skill by examiners as well, so you might want to join these quotations up together and sort of discuss them separately as well, the separate connotations of them. But the semantic field of illness and disease is used to describe Jekyll throughout this scene. This is a marked contrast to the earlier chapter where so the chapter that was called Dr. Jekyll is Quite at Ease, in which he appears as a large, well-made, smooth-faced man. So there's a massive contrast here. He did not rise to meet his visitor, but held out a cold hand and bade him welcome in a changed voice. So you might want to make note of deadly sick and cold hand on your notebook if you're making notes of key quotations. And now, said Mr. Utterson, as soon as Poole had left them, you have heard the news? The doctor shuddered. They were crying in the square, he said. I heard them in my dining room. One word, said the lawyer. Carew was my client, but so are you, and I want to know what I am doing. You have not been mad enough to hide this fellow. Utterson, I swear to God, cried the doctor, I swear to God I will never set eyes on him again. I bind my honour to you that I am done with him in this world. It is all at an end, and indeed he does not want my help. You do not know him as I do. He is safe, he is quite safe. Mark my words, he will never more be heard of. So Jekyll is reassuring Utterson that Hyde will never be heard of again, that he doesn't want anything to do with him. The lawyer listened gloomily. This is really important, because the sickness and anxiety that Jekyll seems to suffer from in this scene is a visible sign of the mental struggle that he is hiding from Mr. Utterson. Jekyll denies that Hyde has any hold on him anymore, and the letter suggests that Hyde is on his way out. Yet there is this lingering anxiety that is not explained by the evidence Jekyll presents. So in a moment he's going to present some evidence. This scene is illuminating for Utterson in particular as a character, because it shows how he disregards what is in front of his eyes, and we've discussed this in a lot of depth before, how Utterson seems to disregard a lot of things, and it's very strange, especially considering he is a lawyer who should be extremely emotionally intelligent and be able to decipher feelings and emotions and get to the bottom of things, but really he doesn't seem to do any of that, which is really very peculiar for a man of his status and his occupation. He disregards what is in front of his eyes, so Jekyll's obvious anxiety in favour of what he wants to believe or can rationally understand. So it's again this hypocritical nature. The theme of hypocrisy is presented here, about how Utterson can see what's going on in front of him, but it's almost like he's oblivious to it, he ignores it. He did not like his friend's feverish manner. You seem pretty sure of him, said he, so you might want to make note of feverish manner as well, to join up the quotations that we went through earlier, where Stevenson uses the semantic field of disease or illness when referring to Jekyll. You seem pretty sure of him, said he, and for your sake I hope you may be right. If it came to a trial, your name might appear. I'm quite sure of him, replied Jekyll. I have grounds for certainty that I cannot share with anyone. But there is one thing on which you may advise me. I have received a letter, and I am at a loss whether I should show it to the police. I should like to leave it in your hands, Utterson. You would judge wisely, I am sure. I have so great a trust in you. I am quite sure of him, replied Jekyll. I have grounds for certainty that I cannot share with anyone, but there is one thing on which you may advise me. I have received a letter, and I am at a loss whether I should show it to the police. I should like to leave it in your hands, Utterson. You would judge wisely, I am sure. I have so great a trust in you. So he's received a letter from Hyde. Jekyll has received a letter from Hyde, and he'd like to leave it with Utterson. He'd like Utterson's opinion on it, and also he'd like Utterson to sort of guard it. You fear, I suppose, that it might lead to his detection? Asked the lawyer. No, said the other. I cannot say that I care what becomes of Hyde. I'm quite done with him. I was thinking of my own character, which this hateful business has rather exposed. So Utterson is assuming that Hyde is trying to protect Jekyll is trying to protect Hyde in some way. But clearly, Jekyll clearly and categorically says this is not the case at all. He's completely done with Hyde. He's more worried about his own reputation. Utterson ruminated a while. He was surprised at his friend's selfishness, and yet relieved by it. Well, said he at last, let me see the letter. The letter was written in an odd, upright hand and signed Edward Hyde, and it signified, briefly enough, that the writer's benefactor, Dr. Jekyll, whom he had long so unworthily repaid for 1,000 generosities, need labour under no alarm for his safety, as he had means of escape on which he placed a sure dependence. The lawyer liked this letter well enough. It put a better colour on the intimacy that he had looked for, and he blamed himself for some of his past suspicions. So Utterson seems really satisfied with this letter. He's glad that Jekyll's looking out for himself and being selfish and not helping Hyde. Have you the envelope? He asked. So Utterson asked this question. I burned it, replied Jekyll, before I thought what I was about, but it bore no postmark. The note was handed in. Shall I keep this and sleep upon it? Asked Utterson. I wish you to judge for me entirely, was the reply. I have lost confidence in myself. Well, I shall consider, returned the lawyer. So Jekyll is involving Utterson as his lawyer and also his friend, but what he's asking him to do goes beyond both of Utterson's roles. He's being asked to take care of Jekyll's affairs for him, and Jekyll verbally hands over the whole burden of Hyde to Utterson. Utterson's response, though, is measured and shows us how blind he is to the real danger that he is in by association. He doesn't even seem to reflect that he's covering for the murder of one of his own clients. So he doesn't seem to question the meaning of this letter. He doesn't seem to think it's a bit weird or strange. He's just satisfied with it, and it's really bizarre that a man of his intelligence wouldn't question it. And now one word more. It was Hyde who dictated the terms in your will about that disappearance. The doctor seemed seized with a qualm of faintness. He shut his mouth tight and nodded. I knew it, said Utterson. He meant to murder you. You have had a fine escape. I have had what is far more to the purpose, returned the doctor solemnly. I have had a lesson. Oh God, Utterson, what a lesson I have had, and he covered his face for a moment with his hands. On his way out, the lawyer stopped and had a word or two with Poole. By the by, said he, there was a letter handed in today. What was the messenger like? But Poole was positive nothing had come except by post, and only circulars by that, he added. This news sent off the visitor with his fears renewed. So Utterson asked Poole whether somebody came round with a letter, and Poole said nobody's come round with a letter. It must have been sent by post. So now this really disturbs Utterson again. His fears are renewed, Stevenson says. Plainly the letter had come by the laboratory door. Possibly, indeed, it had been written in the cabinet, and if that were so, it must be differently judged and handled with more caution. So if there is anything more threatening than the appearance of Hyde's unmistakably evil face, it is its absence. The suggestion that Hyde is lurking somewhere, even closer to Jekyll than once thought, and has delivered the letter without using the main door, once again makes the relationship between Jekyll and Hyde unexplainable. The newsboys, as he went, were crying themselves hoarse along the footways. Special edition, shocking murder of an MP. That was the funeral oration of one friend and client, and he could not help a certain apprehension lest the good name of another should be sucked down in the eddy of the scandal. It was at least a ticklish decision that he had to make, and self-reliant as he was by habit, he began to cherish a longing for advice. It was not to be had directly, but perhaps he thought it might be fished for. So now Utterson's looking for advice. He's thinking he needs some advice on this letter that he's received. Presently after, he sat on one side of his own hearth, with Mr. Guest, his head clerk, up on the other, and midway between, at a nicely calculated distance from the fire, a bottle of a particular old wine that had long dwelt unsunned in the foundation of his house. So Utterson's desire to unburden his mind, having been playing detective alone, shows a more human side to this society of upright professionals that he represents. But he cannot shed his professional identity, and even the cosy hearth where he finds Mr. Guest, so the person he's come to seek advice from, does not change the fact that he is confiding in his clerk. So somebody who works for him. I'm not a family member or a friend. So again, there's this idea of bachelorhood. They're removed from community and society in a way. They don't depend on their wives or a woman. It's very much a society of men, and we've discussed this and the impact of this. The fog still slept on the wing above the drowned city, where the lamps glimmered like carbuncles. So carbuncles are red precious stones. And again, we notice how Stevenson creates a brooding, sinister atmosphere with the flickering light of the many street lamps, and his personification again of the fog as well. Again, almost like a character in itself, creating an air of unease. And through the muffle and smother of these fallen clouds, the procession of the town's life was still rolling in through the great arteries with a sound as of a mighty wind. So we've got again the air of impending doom being reinforced with the city as almost drowned. But the room was gay with firelight. In the bottle the acids were long ago resolved. The imperial dye has softened with time. As the colour grows richer in stained windows, the glow of hot autumn afternoons on hillside vineyards was ready to be set free and to disperse the fogs of London. Insensibly the lawyer melted. There was no man from whom he kept fewer secrets than Mr. Guest, and he was not always sure that he kept as many as he meant. Guest had often been on business to the doctor's. He knew Poole. He could scarce have failed to hear of Mr. Hyde's familiarity about the house. He might draw conclusions. Was it not as well, then, that he should see a letter which put that mystery to rights? And above all, since Guest, being a great student and critic of handwriting, would consider the step natural and obliging, the clerk, besides, was a man of counsel. He would scarce read so strange a document without dropping a remark, and by that remark Mr. Utterson might shape his future course. So he's come to Mr. Guest, his clerk, for advice, but he's also this Mr. Guest, who we've just come to meet, is also a professional at understanding and deciphering handwriting and also relating it to people. "This is a sad business about Sir Danvers," he said. "Yes, sir, indeed. It has elicited a great deal of public feeling," returned Guest. "The man, of course, was mad." "I should like to hear your views on that," replied Utterson. "I have a document here in his handwriting. It is between ourselves, for I scarce know what to do about it. It is an ugly business at the best, but there it is, quite in your way, a murderer's autograph." Guest's eyes brightened, and he sat down at once and studied it with passion. "No, sir," he said, "not mad, but it is an odd hand." "And by all accounts a very odd writer," added the lawyer. Just then the servant entered with a note. "Is that from Dr. Jekyll, sir?" inquired the clerk. "I thought I knew the writing. Anything private, Mr. Utterson?" "Only an invitation to dinner. Why? Do you want to see it?" "One moment. I thank you, sir." And the clerk laid the two sheets of paper alongside and sedulously compared their contents. "Thank you, sir," he said at last, returning both. "It's a very interesting autograph." So they've just received a note from Jekyll as well, inviting them over for dinner. Well, Mr. Guest has, and they're now comparing the two letters, comparing the handwriting. There was a pause during which Mr. Utterson struggled with himself. "Why did you compare them, Guest?" So Utterson is perplexed and confused by why Guest has decided to compare the two, because obviously they're from two different people, so why would you compare them? But again, this is another insight into how how short-sighted, how naive, how unintelligent really Utterson is, because he doesn't think to compare them, but somebody like Guest, who isn't very close to Jekyll, is comparing them, again showing how much brighter Guest is than Utterson. He inquired suddenly. "Well, sir," returned the clerk, "there's a rather singular resemblance. The two hands are in many points identical, only differently sloped." "Rather quaint," said Utterson. "It is, as you say, rather quaint," returned Guest. "I wouldn't speak of this note, you know," said the master. "No, sir," said the clerk, "I understand." But no sooner was Mr. Utterson alone that night than he locked the note into his safe. So again, the note has been locked up in a safe, again the theme of secrecy, where it reposed from that time forward. What, he thought, Henry Jekyll forged for a murderer? And his blood ran cold in his veins. So after confiding in Mr. Guest and not getting very far, Utterson is now presented with a palpable piece of evidence, chilling in its implications for Dr. Jekyll's predicament. Yet, as usual, Utterson silences his concerns and just at the moment of discovery shuts down the conversation. We've discussed this in a lot of detail in previous videos about how just when Utterson is about to get to the bottom of something, he silences it and pushes it away. It is interesting that Guest is more perceptive than Utterson, his master, in recognizing the similarity between the two types of handwriting. So I'm asking you a question now, and I'd like you to write your response in the comments below if you have got any ideas. And remember, it's really important to engage with text, have your own opinions on it, and this is all based on your opinion. Being critical and being opinionated is highly awarded by all exam boards, and it's right at the top of the levels as well. So it's really important that you do engage with text in an opinionated way. Why do you think this is? So I'll read it again. "It is interesting that Guest is more perceptive than Utterson, his master, in recognizing the similarity between the two types of handwriting. Why do you think this is? What's your opinion on this?" As in other chapters, a cloak of secrecy descends upon matters at the end. Guest is sworn to silence, and the note is locked in Utterson's safe. So that's the end of chapter 5. If you found this video useful, then please remember to comment with a response to the question that I've asked, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.